Garlic Rosemary Sourdough Discard bread. So fluffy, so yummy. It's a little bit of a cheat, but it uses up so much of that sourdough discard when it's really flat and needs some life put back into it. And did I mention how quick it is? You can have this bread done in as little as an hour and a half. Well, 2 hours. So if you need bread for dinner tonight, this is your recipe. It's awesome. I'm gonna show you a recipe that I took from Lisa from the farmhouse on Boone, her beginner's sourdough bread. And I cheated a little bit and I put a tablespoon of yeast in there. I also added garlic and rosemary, and OMG, I got the fluffiest, yummiest garlic rosemary sourdough bread you've ever had. So I'm gonna share this recipe, and I can write down a little description of it in the description box so you have the recipe you can write down too. Alrighty, you're gonna need a bowl or a plastic container. I've really been enjoying the plastic with the plastic lid. A scale, your flour, we've got our sourdough starter there, some yeast, salt, measuring cups and spoons, and I forgot to add in the garlic and the rosemary in this clip, so you'll see where we add that in later on. A scale really comes in handy while making bread, as we're going to be measuring everything out in grams and not cups and teaspoons and measurements like that. With the exception here of these two ingredients, we're going to take about a tablespoon of dry active yeast, and we are going to take about 2 tablespoons of sugar, and then we are going to mix in 325 grams of water. Give it a stir and let it sit there for about 5 minutes until it gets nice and bubbly and frothy. Now that our yeast is active and bubbly, we're going to add in 475 grams of all-purpose flour. To that, we will add 10 grams of salt. Tear out your scale and add 100 grams of your sourdough discard. My discard was quite flat and hadn't been fed in a couple days, so I added a little bit more than 100 grams. It's gonna add a little extra flavor in there. And I like using a butter knife to kind of cut off the starter when I'm pouring it in, and then to refeed my starter. So I'll just leave that over there and I'll feed that when we're done. I think I have it all mixed in now, so get I love these Amish whisks, and I heard that you don't want to mix on your scale because it can mess up the digital part of it. I'll just move that over here out of the way. We just mix this until all the flour and water and ingredients are incorporated. I typically don't love plastic containers, but it makes this process really easy and it comes out really clean. And because I'm not storing it in the plastic, it doesn't bother me as much. This comes together so quickly. I love this recipe because, well, for so many reasons. First and foremost, it's absolutely delicious, but it comes together so fast. Like within a couple of hours, you can have the most delicious fluffy sourdough, not super sour, bread. I've made this recipe about 3 times in the last week and a half. And this one I'm probably just going to stick into the freezer so I have a loaf ready. And I also needed to use up some of my sourdough discard because I let it get really super flat on the counter, barely had any bubbles left to it. So instead of just tossing it out, I love this sourdough discard recipe. And it is kind of a cheat too because, well, it's a big cheat because I add the yeast into it, but oh boy, is it worth it with how fluffy and yummy it turns out. Okay, so this is pretty much mixed up. And we're just going to put the lid on it and let it sit for 30 minutes. And then we're going to do a series of 3 stretch and folds. We'll let it rest 30 minutes in between each stretch and fold. So in about an hour and a half or so, if I'm completely on top of it, we will be baking bread. And I kind of give one corner just a little bit of a breather because of the yeast in here. It starts to grow really quickly. In the meantime, I'm going to feed my sourdough because it's been a couple days. And so, got a little flat, which is okay. So I put about, I think I had maybe about a cup or so of starter in there. I'm gonna put probably close to 3/4 of a cup of flour, and then I just add a little water to see how I like the consistency. I like it on the thicker side. I think it gets a lot more bubblier than when it's more liquidy, but that is just my preference. I believe they call that the low hydration starter. Try to get all the goops up off the side, and it's just kind of impossible to not have it, especially when you're just pouring it straight out of the jar when you're making recipes. And then every so often swap out your starter into a fresh glass or container or whatever it is that you keep your starter in. Okay, this is really thick, like super duper thick pancake batter. Not quite a dough, but it's definitely not runny, super sticky. That's how I like it. Yeah. Super sticky. Okay. And I just barely set that lid on there. And then I stick it in my window. By tomorrow afternoon, maybe, it will probably be up to here. It'll double in size. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit of avocado oil on my hand so that it doesn't stick. Otherwise, you could use water on your hands too, but you're going to want to get something on your hands, either water or oil, so that it doesn't stick when you perform your stretch and folds. So you just grab a corner, turn it, pull it over the other corner. It is going to stick a little, still very sticky dough. And then just do another quarter turn, pull it over on top of itself, and then kind of dig down in there, pull and jiggle and stretch it over. And maybe I'll do one more. We're putting some air into it, and it is also hydrating the flour right now too. So we put the lid kind of 3/4 of the way back on again, and we wait another 30 minutes. Okay, she's getting a lot more bubbly. I'll just get some more olive oil on my hand. And we'll just do another set of stretch and fold. This counts as our second set of stretch and folds. And you can just already start to tell the difference of the dough. It's getting less sticky. It's hydrating. That gluten is forming. Okay. Do one more little. Okay. Oh my gosh. I forgot the garlic and the rosemary. Okay, we need to add that in right now. Well, better late than never. Grab that scale again in our little measuring bowl, pull out the rosemary and the garlic powder. Tire the scale and measure out 10 grams of garlic powder. Pour that over the dough. Fresh chopped garlic would also be amazing in this recipe. I'm going to do 3 5-finger pinches crushed up in your hand of rosemary. I'd say that's about 3 hefty teaspoons of chopped rosemary into this recipe. Again, you could also add fresh rosemary. Okay. And then I'm going to put some more oil back on my hand. And I am going to stretch and fold that into the dough. I should say it is a lot easier to put the spices in with the dry mixing in the first place, but it's okay because this is going to rise again and then we're going to stretch and fold it again and it's going to still get baked in there. So we're going to let that rise again for 30 more minutes. That will be our third stretch and fold, and then we'll get it baked after that. I have a gas oven, and it can take a little bit of time to get it up to the temperature of what you set it at when you turn it on. So while we're waiting for the next 30-minute rise, I took the time to put my Dutch oven, lid and all, into the oven and set my oven temperature for around 475. The recipe that I typically go by says to set it around 500, but this is just the sweet spot that I have found with my oven. It's now been 30 minutes and this dough is ready for its last third stretch and fold. It's now super hydrated. The herbs are well combined into the dough. There's no sticky, tacky feeling to the dough anymore. So we're going to perform this last stretch and fold and really making an effort to form it into a ball and tucking those edges underneath itself. I like adding a little bit of oil in this last shaping stage before our last 30-minute rise, so you get that chewy golden crust when you're done baking. For the last 30-minute rise, I'm going to transfer the dough into the base of my kitchen stand mixer. Tear out a sheet of parchment paper and line the base of whatever container you decide to use. I'm using the base of my kitchen stand here because I'm trying to hold that shape of a ball of dough, as the dough will just fall flat in the other container that I was using. Cover for another 30 minutes and then we'll get to baking. The final 30-minute rise is done. The dough has risen a little bit more, but it has kept its ball shape due to bowl-like contour of the base or the bowl of the KitchenAid. The dough has a Pillsbury fluffy texture to it. Now for the transfer of the dough into the very hot Dutch oven. Make sure you have your oven gloves, obviously. Pull the preheated hot Dutch oven out of the oven. It probably sat in there for a good 45 minutes to an hour before I pulled it out. And carefully cradle the dough with the parchment paper into the hot Dutch oven. Try to pull that parchment paper out of the Dutch oven as much as you can. Pop the lid back on the Dutch oven, place everything into the oven, and bake for 20 to 25 minutes until until the bread is golden brown. She passes the tap test on the crust, so it is time to pull her out. Look at how beautiful, and she smells delicious. It's important to pull the bread out immediately. I've got a cooling rack here, so I'm going to very, very carefully grab the edges of the parchment paper. Sometimes they get brittle while baking, so be really, really careful in this step and remove the parchment paper from underneath. It is very common for the bottom of your bread to be a little bit more burnt than the top, and you're going to want to let this cool for probably at least 2 hours. It is very difficult to wait, but it'll be well worth it. Here we are about an hour and a half later. The bread is slightly warm, but look at how pillowy and fluffy it is. As my daddy always taught me, do as I say, not as I do. I really should have waited another 30 minutes to maybe even an hour longer, as the interior crumb develops as it cools and doesn't taste as chewy or doughy. I could eat this bread as dessert. My favorite is just plain butter on it. My husband loves butter and jelly on his. Babe, you want to come do a taste test?
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
The best one yet? I cut into it too quickly.
Yeah, that's good. I like it.
Mm-hmm. So there you have it. Pillow soft, garlic, rosemary, sourdough discard bread. From start to finish, ready in a couple of hours. Do you have any fun recipes that you use with your sourdough discard? Leave them in the comments below.